Welcome to our webinar on Christian pilgrimage and travel in this moment. My name is Joe Swimmer. I'm the Executive Director of the SEEP Network, and we are so pleased to have you with us today. And we're joined by a great panel of our friends from St. Martin's in Houston, Russ Levinson, James Ridgway and Mark Ye from EO Travel, and Donald Fishburne, former president of the board of SEEP Network and longtime friend of SEEP and all of those on this call. We're really excited to be talking about the return to pilgrimages and travel in what seems a tenuous moment, but hopefully our crew will be able to talk us through any anxieties that we might have and about how we're going to get back into this wonderful gift of being able to visit holy places and share experiences with others. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Donald, and thank you all for being with us. And please, if you have any questions or comments, put them into the chat feature and enjoy the conversation.
Great. Joe, thanks very much. I'm glad to be with you and glad to be with Russ and James and Mark. We'll tell you a little bit about where we are and what's coming up in just a few moments. Sarah and I have since 2015 done more traveling than we used to do. That was true, of course, until the pandemic. That slowed us down, but we're still looking forward to travel, and we're helping other folks make plans to make pilgrimage, other sorts of travel overseas, especially in the Holy Land, Egypt, England, Scotland, Europe, and some other wonderful places, some of it pilgrimage, some of it more leisure-based. As Joe has told you, we have some wonderful speakers with us today, and I'll let them introduce themselves just a little bit more. And I need to say that I'm going to start with Mark Ye, because Mark with EO Tours is in an airport at the moment, awaiting boarding. And so, Mark, I thought you might, I've known you since, I want to know how many SEEP network conferences, as well as general conventions of the Episcopal Church, and we run into each other in other conferences. What's coming up in terms of where we will be seeing EO and seeing you, and what's coming up in travel?
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I've been working with Donald for 6 or 7 years now. Lots of events, some travel, some other unplanned visits. And working with the Episcopal Church all that time as well. I am sitting in the airport in Tampa. I'm off to another church leadership conference actually in Nashville this week, and looking forward to the SEEP conference in February, and then General Convention coming up in July. So we will be there. We will be sponsors for the SEEP conference again. And yes, Joe, I promise we will get an agreement to you soon. And then we will have an exhibit at the General Convention. And soon we'll hopefully be able to announce we're going to have a couple of partners with us at the convention that you will recognize. I can't announce that yet, but a couple of organizations related very directly to the Episcopal Church in the United States as well as in Europe. So we're working on some details to be able to announce that sometime later on this fall. So I am out and around doing some conferences this fall and then into the spring as we've been traveling with EO since April. Actually, my wife and I were on our first EO trip April 3rd to Turkey. And since then we've been in probably a dozen countries all over Europe, as far west as Amsterdam, I guess, with some river cruises. And all the way over to the Holy Land and a bunch of places in between. And you'll hear from James, who's over in Europe right now, so he can tell you more about that when he comes on. So thanks, Donald.
Great. Glad you're with us, Mark. I hope you can stay with us, but we know how airports can be. Glad to have this time with you. Russ, you and Laura and Sarah and I had an opportunity to be together a couple of falls ago on River Cruise on the Danube, and you were a wonderful speaker there with a very attentive crowd of Texans and other luminaries and saints. And you've got some things coming up. I wonder, you've also lately had a very busy time of it, especially in the last month, few weeks, with homecoming at St. Martin's Houston. So if you'll give us a little snapshot of your life and the ministry there, the ministry of pilgrimage and trips with some of your folks and the benefits of that in the past, as well as look forward to the next year, that'd be great.
Sure, I'll be brief, if possible. So I've been at St. Martin's 14 years, and we have just finished our second major building project in the last 14 years that we have had in my time there, and vastly expanded our campus and enabled us to really renovate a lot of buildings, but create new buildings. We had all in all 10 new building projects, which were either total renovations or new buildings altogether. And it filled up my year. I mean, you can do that work from almost anywhere, and actually it enabled us to complete a lot of work within our scope of calendar. And so I hope people will, if they come to Houston, come see me, and I'm happy to show you around. But it's finished, and one of the things I'm pleased with it being done. It enables us to do more ministry, not only to our members, but we're very committed to the community as well. So we're able to do a lot more outreach ministry. And what we're seeing, I think I would say during the pandemic, we actually began to slowly open up Pentecost Sunday. So back in May, and we really got to a place where we were kind of, as I said, we were very distanced and very careful. We're still all of those things, but clearly we've moved into a time of what I call kind of engaged management. I mean, this obviously is going to be with us, barring the Lord removing it in some way. But and so we're just very careful about how we do things. And we had 6 services on Sunday yesterday, and yet those are all we've got. Still doing social distancing, still doing sanitation, still doing mask and things like that. But then we have people, we're strongly recommending, we're not requiring vaccines to come into the Lord's house, but we sure ask people to take it. And but what we've seen is a real eagerness to come back to part of the community again. I mean, there's a huge hunger to come back and be together, even if it's in this strange kind of hybrid way that we're doing. And I have not traveled overseas as some of you have, but in the last week I'm in Rhode Island right now. I just spent several days in Boston at a Order of St. John gathering. And as we all know, travel is, once you get to where you're going, you're thrilled. But there's, whether or not it's a pandemic or not, the adventure of getting to where you're going can be inconvenient. I would say it's a little more inconvenient, but we've now traveled around the country several times now, and it certainly has not been prohibitive in a way that I don't want to travel. And in fact, the hunger to be back out there and get going is really with me. So we have loved the pilgrimages we've taken. My first was probably 20 years ago, or a little bit more than 20 years ago, of taking a group of about 30 people from Lafayette, Louisiana to the heart of London, and traveling around with those folks for 10 days of every age, from very young to our oldest was a woman who was in her 90s. By the way, she was a lot easier to deal with sometimes than the very younger ones. And what you find, of course, is you might have gone to church with these folks for a long time, but when you travel with people, when you eat with them, when you go to places, when you go out for a drink or go out for a coffee, you certainly get to know them because you're with them 24/7. And I would say, if I'm honest, the first time I did it, I thought, do I really want to be with people I'm in church with for 2 weeks at a time? And we found that we loved it. And so the other times that we've done that, whether it was the trip down the Danube with Donald and Sarah, my wife, and I can't remember how many we brought, 30 or 40 folks on the river cruise. Not only did we really get to know them in ways we never had before, but when we came back to Houston, back to St. Martin's, it became a new community at St. Martin's. So this is a group that gets together on a fairly regular basis at St. Martin's. We had a 1-month anniversary when we got back from one of our trips. One of the trips we took was throughout the Holy Land. We went through virtually all of Egypt, West Bank, and Jordan, with, again, about 30 or 40 people And it was a remarkable community building experience, faith building experience. Laura and I had been to the Holy Land before on our own. So when you go with a group, you have some knowledge of being able to tell people, well, now I can share with you why I wanted you to come so bad. I wanted you to see what an incredible life-changing experience this can be. And so every time we've done this, it's deepened and broadened our circle of friendships. And for that alone, I'm grateful. But for the hundreds, if not thousands of more memories that we made, we're even more grateful. And we're looking forward to 2 trips that you all, I'm working with EO on next year. And we already have a lot of interest, I know, at St. Martin's, but I've served in a couple of other places. I've been in Virginia and Tennessee and Alabama and Florida. And we have people who are actually signing up from those places as well. So.
Great, good. Russ, what's your first trip coming up next summer?
We're going to, I think we've got 2 categories, and I'm learning as you have invited me into this wonderful opportunity, but we've kind of got more of a fellowship trip, which is a trip to go to Alaska. And it will be next June. I think it starts June 11th, I believe, right? And it's a short cruise. It's about 7 days. There's an opportunity to do a little bit more on the front and the tail end of that trip. But we really see that. And I do have people who are very interested in going, if you go to, as we are on other trips, if you go to Italy, if you go to Israel, you've certainly got a bank of material to work with when you're trying to discuss people's faith journey. But of course, your faith journey can deepen a lot just when you're with other people you know and like to worship with and be with and serve with. So we're really calling this a fellowship opportunity. We're inviting people from our church and friends and family. We've invited friends and family to come and be with us as we spend 7 days in one of the most beautiful places in the world. And as I understand, it's also one of the most vaccinated places in the United States. So, but that's a year from now. Hopefully we're having a different conversation a year from now on that. And then in August, we'll be taking a Bible Lands tour, looking at places around Paul's ministry that'll include Athens and Ephesus and Rhodes and Crete and some wonderful places there. And we have to, Laura and I have been to those places. My wife and I have been to those places before, and they open tremendous opportunities to discuss and grow. To walk in the streets of Ephesus is life-changing. To stand in the shadow of the Parthenon on Mars Hill and think about Paul's sermon in Athens is, to actually stand at the spot and think about those places, again, is deeply moving. But every step you take with a pilgrim, in my mind, when you're traveling, you're making a new pilgrimage. So when I go back, I usually see something I've never seen before. And we love travel. I don't play golf anymore. I play some, but I don't have a lot of hobbies anymore. But if I want to invest myself in a long time experience that really is a worthy investment, we love to travel because we always walk away with a different mindset that's usually better, healthier, and broader.
Right. Well, I can agree with all of that. My own preaching and teaching over the years really has been enriched by having been to the teaching steps at the temple, to be at the Wailing Wall, to be in the Galilee, and to be in Egypt and discover some things in Egypt that I really didn't know. Help me understand the Holy of Holies in the temple in Jerusalem as we go along. And not only is it a good thing for the preacher to be informed, it's also great to look out in the congregation and see some people light up, those people who've been there and those people who anticipate on going to the next pilgrimage. So really is rewarding ministry. Good. Well, thank you. I will come back around to Russ in a moment. I know some people watching the webinar are wondering, well, yes, Russ has been doing some traveling. I've been doing some. Mark's doing some. James has been in Austria and just in the last hour or so, I think, arrived in Zurich. He's been traveling a good bit in the last few months. A lot of people have the logical, reasonable question, James, what do we expect? And I don't know if you want to begin with Israel there. What is EO able to do to make it possible, safe, enjoyable to visit the Holy Land and to make pilgrimage or to take trips to other venues?
Thanks, Donald. starting with Israel, Israel's reopening again. They closed down. They sort of reopened at the end of May. They closed down in August to deal with the Delta variant issues there. They're reopening again on the 20th. And they have a list of rules to enter. A couple tests coming in. They do a serological test, which will be a finger prick, just to make sure you have the antibodies. A couple of the electronic forms. I think going anywhere in the world these days, you have to fill out a passenger locator form, so the country you're going to knows where you are, or how to get a hold of you. So they have those regulations, and we help our travelers get through all that process. Israel's requiring vaccination coming in, and they will be requiring a booster shot if it's been so long since you've been vaccinated. So we help everybody through that, and then once you get into Israel, it's almost like Pilgrim's Progress. You have to make it through all these steps to get to the Promised Land, or the pearly gates, or whatever. And from there, the touring inside of Israel is very normal, and you can feel very safe in the Holy Land. It's one of the most vaccinated countries. They're very, very serious about that, and we've had no issues. We've had probably 300 guests there since May, and no one's caught COVID. Everyone's had a great time. Frankly, it's a great time to go if you can make it through that, because there are virtually no tourists there at all, even once it restarts in September. All the pictures I've seen, I was just with one of our tour leaders this past week in Austria, and she showed me pictures of the Church Nativity, and absolutely not a soul in the church. And those of you were there in maybe 2019, you probably waited 2 or 3 hours to get into the Church Nativity. So it's a great time to go, and we certainly try to do everything we can to help our guests get there and get through all that paperwork.
Right. It's good for me to know, having been to Israel a number of times, that EO is doing what you do well and have been doing almost for 50 years. The center mission of EO Pilgrimage and Tours being the Holy Land. That was the genesis of the whole effort. I've had some inquiries in the last week or so of, well, wait, some of my people are not really comfortable with this notion of landing in Israel and having to do a blood draw and then waiting on lab tests and all. You've explained to me that's, and I've read some notes from EO lately that Mark shared with us. Actually, on landing at Tel Aviv, which I personally find the Tel Aviv airport, arrival at Tel Aviv is actually one of my favorite airports now, because everything works. The Tel Aviv airport is secure, it's clean, it's logical. You know where to go to get your baggage. You know what's going to happen next, and what sort of clearances, and who's going to meet you. One of the questions that I did get was, do you on landing really have a blood draw done? And you've just answered that. Can you talk a little bit about the fingerprint prick? And as I understand it, the result of that is back very quickly as one of the tests that's required.
Yeah, so let me just say, the representative actually now, it's gotten even better in COVID days. So the representative actually meets you at the door of the plane. So you all just gather right there as you come off the plane, and then go as a group, go through passport control. They moved it even further out, get all that done. And then it's pretty much just a one-way path through the airport. You take the PCR test first, which you pre-book before you get there. So it's a very quick process. Take the PCR test, and then you move into to do the serological test, which is a finger prick, which you do a finger prick, you put it in. I mean, to me, it looks like a pregnancy test kit. It's one of those long things, and you put it in there, and the results are back in 20 minutes. So, and once you've proven you have the antibodies, then you're free to go, leave the airport. Everybody gets on the bus, and there is no quarantine or waiting period. Otherwise, you literally start touring. Now, most of the touring, most of the flights arriving into Tel Aviv arrive pretty late in the afternoon. So typically there isn't a whole lot of touring that first day anyway, but you're free to go and do whatever there. So that technology was used on Jewish birthright groups coming into the country all summer. It has not actually been used on regular tourists. So we're expecting when it reopens on the 19th, that will go into place at that point. Previously, they actually did take a vial of blood. So we're making progress as we go.
All right. EO and other tour managers, group managers have relationships with hotels, relationships with the holy places you're going and the sites. My experience is the guide and the driver typically get you at the right place at the right time. That is not at the most crowded time at Nativity or Holy Sepulchre, but you have a number of groups going beginning next week or so, and then October, November, and ongoing through the winter, spring, and on. I think the spring is looking to be very busy. Lent and up until Easter, and then again after Easter. As I recall seeing some of the numbers on that, there's some groups that couldn't go in late 2020 and have not been able to go earlier this year. So a lot of us are going to be there. We might see each other there next spring or be on one of Russ's opportunities later in the year. Anything else about being with the tour group and the lead in to your return from through Tel Aviv on the way out? Is that for instance 2 days before departure? Is there another step that and EO has a package for all of this? Is that correct?
We do have a package. The testing package, just because most of the experiences weren't priced with a testing package in mind, because we didn't know that was coming. So the testing, there's a PCR test a couple days before you return home. The United States does not require a PCR test to return home. You could also do a rapid antigen test, which I just did last night for my return on Wednesday. But Israel, for whatever reason, requires a PCR test. We're still trying to lobby them to, let's just do a faster antigen test, which is going to be cheaper. But assuming there's 2 PCR tests and a serological test, the pricing seems to be around $150 for those 3 tests. But you have the testing. Obviously we have hand sanitizer. The bus has been equipped with filtration systems that kill COVID. Some of the indoor places require masks. The mask requirements could change, but so many things in the Holy Land are outdoors, so you're not going to have to wear a mask there. You don't have to wear a mask on the bus as it stands now. So the experience is, is very much like normal. Rescheduling, there obviously a lot of groups have had to reschedule and move to 2022, 2023. Same time, I think people are still wearing now. It's they tend to watch the news too much. Sitting over here in Zurich and being in Austria and in Bavaria the past week, everything's normal over here. I mean, it's sort of, you get over here for a while, you're like, okay, what was the big deal in the U.S.? Why was I scared to go here? Everything's functioning normally. It's just there aren't any tourists. So it's the same way in Israel. Israel is, functioning very, very well. It's just we're missing the tourists. And if I can just say, the pilgrims in the Holy Land play a vital role. I mean, it's a life-changing experience, as Russ indicated. But the pilgrims bring all those communities together in the Holy Land. So the Arab community, the Jewish community, the Armenians, they all have to work together to work with the pilgrims. When the pilgrims aren't there, then they all sort of become isolated communities. And that's when you see some of that friction occur. So, particularly in the Holy Land, they need the pilgrims and tourists to come back to really make things work well as a society there.
Right. My first trip to the Holy Land, as it happened, it wasn't when I was in seminary or soon thereafter. It was much later, much more recently. And my first trip there was with EO, and our hotel in Jerusalem was, a 2-minute walk to St. George's Cathedral, our Episcopal Cathedral in the Holy Land. The experience that I had in the hotel was you could be at the cathedral and be aware of the fact that there was a mosque nearby and a synagogue nearby. Some of us would go up to Notre Dame Conference Center just up the hill and go to what the operators of the Catholic Conference Center refer to as the cheese and wine bar up on the roof. They give you the cheese before the wine, but the experience of being on the roof up there, you find yourself in a Roman Catholic conference center looking down on the Episcopal Cathedral, hearing at sunset the call to prayer from the mosque, and realizing that you are within sight of more than just a few synagogues, ancient sites as well as in the modern city. And as you say, it really is remarkable how the people in that land do come together. I understand as an American, and I understand that other Americans are very leery about relationships in Israel, but on a day-to-day basis, Christians and Muslims and Jews are in business with each other or nearby. They're worshiping nearby each other. There's this relationship. On the Sabbath in the hotel, it's I think normal that Palestinian Christians might be on the Friday evening, Saturday morning dinner breakfast staff. Because some folks, some religious Jews, are obviously not going to be working on the Sabbath. And to see that actually working gives me hope that nations and groups prayerfully engaged to our common God, that Christians, Jews, Palestinians, Americans, all of us at least have a basis for conversations. Some of the things that I've enjoyed most in the Holy Land are deliberate conversations. That is, we've been split into small groups and had dinner with Palestinian families in their homes. We've experienced having not a lecture series, but a discussion period, give and take, with a Jewish business person who grew up in Israel, and with, for instance, a Christian professor who lives in Israel, and help us to begin that conversation on a much deeper level than I've ever had in this country of what is it like to share sacred space? What is it like for all of us who consider this holy and holy and holy, Muslims, Jews, Christians? How are we going to build those relationships rather than go further apart? I think it's important that we as Christians from this country and from across the world have the experience, some of us absolutely in person, and some of us in person more than once, and some of us virtually. There are now pilgrimage experiences that are done online. That is, if Russ takes a group of pilgrims from St. Martin's, Houston, it can be that the congregation has been prepared through Christian formation classes to be ready to help be prayerfully launching that pilgrim group, and to say prayers day by day at the same time, or at least in the same order, that the pilgrim group is saying prayers in the morning and at noon and at evening and at nightfall. So it builds bridges. And as Russ has also said, when pilgrim groups come home, they don't want to let go of each other. They want to build that closeness that they've experienced, and especially a large congregation. If you've been with a group of 30, to come back with your eyes open and your heart inspired, to come back to your home parish or cathedral, and to have the opportunity and experience of continuing to learn from each other, and in a helpful, gentle way, to help other people have a vision of what you've experienced overseas. Russ, I don't know if that's rings bells for you. I see.
It very much does. I have to say, one of the things that I do think, and we're seeing a question or two come across, and people are wondering, what is it like to travel there? And unfortunately, if you only watch the news, you would think you would have to be wary about. Let's just be honest. You have to be wary about going to Jerusalem. You have to be wary to go to the country, etc. It is. I felt so much safer in traveling up and down throughout all of Israel than I did in most any place I've traveled. And I think one of the things I would say, we had family members the very first time we went to Israel. You said, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe you're going to Israel." And at the time, there was hardly any conflict going on at that time. And I said, "Would you like to see the Monday edition of the Houston Chronicle?" And I can tell you that it was more dangerous. I'm sorry, I love Houston. I love my city, but it was more dangerous to be in Houston, Texas over the weekend than it would be in all of Israel for an entire year. And I think and part of it is certainly the security. The other part is, I think, as you just mentioned, Donald, people don't realize that it is a multicultural country. And people, one of the things that help people get along is they survive through a thriving economy and the visiting of pilgrims and working together. When you walk through the old city and realize you're actually Jews, Muslims, Arabics, and they're all steps away from each other. Jews, Muslims, Christians, excuse me, they're all right there in the old city. And yes, they often have to work together. And yes, they often get kind of tangled up with each other, but it's not in ways in which the news seems to quickly, make you, when you're in a hotel in Jerusalem, you feel like you're in a hotel in Atlanta or New York or, California. It feels safe. And people are very warmly welcoming. And I had the same experiences that you did of walking down the streets of Israel and hearing the call to prayer and, just the impact that has on you, and also the preconceived notions that it takes away. I mean, this would be a completely different, perhaps, discussion that SEEP could do for us. But, when you leave Israel, go through the wall and into the West Bank, things change, and you have a lot of conversation around that. But there's so many preconceived notions about who lives in the West Bank. I think that's probably right now that's going on. And the first person who walked up to my little group in the West Bank was a Palestinian Christian. And people forget that there are actually also Christians who live in Palestinian areas and vice versa. And all that opens a fresh opportunity for conversation. The other thing I would say, and I think this speaks to the time we're living, and one of the reasons I'm a proponent of my parishioners doing this, or friends and parishioners, we have now lived in our silos for almost 2 years. And, silo living gets lonely, and you become self-focused, and you begin to get it. And lots of people have gotten comfortable with that. But I love that quote of Augustine. We probably ought to put it somewhere. The world is a book, and those who do not travel read only one page. The world is a book, and those who do not travel read only one page. Well, for a year and a half, or since March of last year, we've been reading one page. We open our phones, we discuss the pandemic, we discuss COVID, we discuss its impact on our life. Well, now we're managing it. Now we're finding a way forward. And one of the ways to kind of blow the walls off of that, I think, is to get not just out of the comfort zones of our neighborhood, but to take these kind of wonderful, life-changing, transformative journeys around the world with members of the human family from all over. That's what really excites me. I'm ready to go. I did just talk. I think this speaks to something James just said. I just was with a friend who just flew in from London the other day, and this won't be the case next year, I'm sure. But he said the same thing James said. He said, I went to London, did the test necessary. He said, once I got into London, he said, I saw no face mask. I saw, people were being careful, sanitation stations, restaurants were masking. And then when I flew back, there were 10% of the plane was full. Now I know that's going to change, but those kinds of things, what people are thinking going on around the world is exact. I think James has given us a better picture of that.
All right. Good. Thanks. Russ, I noticed you were looking at some of the chat questions rolling in, and Mark has been really helpful in answering some of those in the chat column. A couple of things that people are asking that are right on target and reasonable. What about trip protection? What about travel insurance, that sort of thing? I tell people whenever I go overseas, well, I wouldn't go overseas in a family trip or in a group trip without some sort of travel protection, trip protection insurance. And of course, EO can talk more about this, about the requirements. Israel, I think, James, these days requires you to have insurance when you come there. And if you can talk about that in a moment, the other questions we're getting have to do with, how much walking is involved, how and what kind of shape must I be in, what sort of physical condition, are there any limitations? I've not had the experience on any of the pilgrimages or trips that I've been with where someone was not able to keep up. Now, there are some opportunities have a slow walking group and a faster walking group, but everybody can keep up. In the Holy Land, for instance, if you walk 2 or 3 miles in a day, that's after lunch, after breakfast, and after getting where you're going, and before lunch, and lunch tends to be relaxed, and then on to another holy site or venue, and then a little bit of walking and so on. It's split up. I grew up in the city of Charleston, South Carolina. If you can navigate the cobblestone streets and the brick streets and the slate streets in Charleston, you pretty much got Jerusalem down. You add some hills to it, and I think that's a fair comparison. Or if you're traveling in this country and you've already traveled to parts of Europe, you're going to find you're going to watch your footing in that same way in Jerusalem. And the tour guide and others with you will help individuals and group members be at a reasonable, safe pace, comfortable pace. I think that's probably easier these days with fewer people there, as James says. James, I know Mark's answering some of these questions in the chat column, as I said, but what are the basics of trip insurance, travel insurance now in Israel, for instance, you're taking a group to Israel?
Trip insurance is required to go to Israel. Now, pretty much any of these things outside those tests that take place in Israel, and really anywhere you go internationally, the airlines and the check-in process really here in the United States. So I fly out of Tampa, but at that first airport when you're checking in, if you're checking in on a through ticket all the way through, like I came to Zurich here now, the airlines are really the gatekeepers for all those documents. I mean, they're the ones that have to check all those things. They're not, interestingly enough, once you get to Israel, they're not actually checking if you have the permit and everything. You just scan your passport. They know you have it, you go on. So the forms and everything are checked in the United States by the airlines. The airlines really don't have any requirements of their own other than you have to wear the mask on a plane. But they're the people that actually check all that. I mean, when I arrived here in Zurich, no one outside the passport, no one checked anything. I had a vaccine or anything like that. So on the travel insurance, it's always good to have travel insurance for sure. The travel insurance needs to cover any quarantine possibilities. And I think that pretty much happens with a trip interruption part of the plan. As the doctor said, you have to quarantine in the hotel for X number of days, you can't leave the room. That's going to be covered, I think, by any travel insurance plan. Again, we haven't actually had to test this because no one's actually failed a PCR test yet out of all of our travelers. So, but that really needs to be in the travel insurance. That's really the new piece that's happened during COVID, is if you would have to quarantine back. Now, speaking of that, the quarantine, if a person does test positive, they're quarantined. If everyone else testing negative, they're going to go home. It's not we're quarantining the entire bus type deal. That also wouldn't happen that I can see in any country if they're testing negative to come back. And Donald, I think the other testing question we talked about earlier this morning in the meeting I was in, the question that everyone seems to have for Israel particularly is like, well, if I take the PCR test and in the US before I go, which is a requirement, and then I take the PCR test when I land, what happens if I get COVID in like those 3 days? So, I don't know how statistically possible that is to actually test negative and then test positive within almost, you could pretty much narrow that down to maybe, 36 hours. I think that's a pretty small percentage chance that would happen. But it's interesting. What we're finding is that's everyone's biggest question is what happens if I test, negative and then positive? Do I have to come right home? How does that work? So the travel insurance should cover that quarantine, but for Israel, that's got to be 0.1% of possibility that would happen.
All right.
I'm a big proponent of the insurance, FYI, and it's very inexpensive. I mean, it's if you're making an investment, obviously, and we've only had to use it one time, and that was when we lost a bag, the airline lost the bag, and the travel insurance called us every single day to see. They were trying to track our bag. We didn't hear anything from the airline. The travel insurance called us every day, and in the meantime, they said, "Here's $1,000. Go buy what you need. Go buy another suitcase. If we find your bag, we'll let you know." And at the very end of our trip, they called us to say they had found the bag. We had to call the airline to track it down, but they found it and had it shipped back to our house. And I buy it every time I go and that's the only time I've had to tap it. But they were great to deal with. Yeah.
Well, just to look forward a little bit, all of us hope for, work for, are trying to use protocols to keep ourselves safe. We're looking forward to a time when we can take a breath and relax a little bit more and travel again. I'm encouraging some folks, I'm helping some folks right now plan and register for a Holy Land pilgrimage in late April, just after, not so long after Easter Day next year. Another group going just a few weeks later, still in the Easter season, but before Pentecost. Sarah and I hope to be, we've been on the Alaska cruise, similar to what Russ is going to, and his family and friends and folks are going to be doing. But we haven't yet been to Greece, so we're looking for opportunities. It really changes my faith perspective so much to be able to say this is no kidding where Jesus would have been teaching, or this is a likely place for Jesus to have confronted Simon Peter and vice versa. And so I haven't been to parts of Greece to which Paul went. Sometimes people will say, well, what about these Paul trips? And I said, well, some of the cruises they include places where Paul went, and there are also some places where Paul would have preferred to go rather than go to prison. And of course, Sarah and I have spent some time in Rome and want to go back. There's a really good opportunity coming up in the next year or so for some special group travel in Rome, and we hope to be part of that. Russ, anything else that has come up in your mind as we've been talking?
No, that was great. I remember when we visited Ephesus, and somebody, and our tour guide was wonderful. The tour guides are also wonderful, I would say. They're very knowledgeable. You really don't need your clergy along because they know probably more than the clergy who come along on the trips. But sitting in the amphitheater where Paul preached his last sermon before he was run out of town on a rail, basically, or you're about to have this moment, Donald. I look forward to stand again in Athens and hear Paul's men of Athens sermon, men and women of Athens sermon. You'll be able to stand right in the place where he began talking about that sermon on the unknown God. I mean, you're right there where that moment in history took place. It's just it's spine tingling in a good way. Very exciting. I'll go back to it's important. We have a limited number of years on this planet, and the more of this planet we can see, and the more of God's children we can see, the more of a blessing I think it is to us and to them as well. So I'm very excited about what the future holds. And if there are minor inconveniences, to go through to get to do this kind of extraordinary travel, then it's worth paying that price.
Mm-hmm. Right. Good. James from Zurich, any thoughts for us today?
Well, and obviously I've been a lot of other places in the Holy Land here this year. So, and I, some in the audience that are playing something to Oberammergau next summer. Was just there. We had a group of tour hosts with us, and they had a little bit of time to meet one of the actors playing Jesus, and had a meeting with Caiaphas, who's also the financial director for the whole play. I can pretty much tell you that Oberammergau is going to happen next year, one way or the other. The village will have a financial disaster if it doesn't. So that was good news. A lot of things were postponed from 2020 to 2022, and that's about almost a 390-year tradition. The generation that want there to be a part of that, so that tradition's on. So that was encouraging to see. There's always a question: do I have to be vaccinated, not vaccinated for just cruises and things like that? I think, as Russ said earlier, I would encourage people to get vaccinated. I think as we go through this winter coming up and then into the next year, Europe may get a little tighter with their restrictions, but I still think they're going to let vaccinated people come in. It's going to be the unvaccinated that really have a challenge. I'm not going to say they're going to require it for next summer going forward, but if you're vaccinated, it makes life a whole lot easier. And if you're planning something, I would just say, persist and make it through the paperwork, because the experience is really great on the other side. So.
Great, thanks. I think we've covered most of the questions and comments, some very good questions, some very good comments in the chat panel. They have to do with practicalities about tips, and also what do the tour guides make, and practicalities having to do with preparing your group to go on pilgrimage. I know some Episcopal clergy and some others. Of course, EO travels a lot with Methodists, and Roman Catholics also travel with EO and with other travel companies. I've really been impressed with those clergy who have an adult forum for a whole season before going, for instance, to a CC in Rome, or a whole series on Paul before you go on, so that if there's a speaker on board, you're already up to speed to learn at a faster pace. If you've had a reintroduction or a refresher course for a period of Sundays before a cruise or a land tour, there's an opportunity really to sort of catch those connections between scripture and being in the place and the comments of other people, lay as well as clergy. It really does help to have an adult forum beforehand. And as Russ says, sort of generally and naturally, a pilgrim group will ask, can we get together next month or in a month or so? And that's good for building the Christian community as well. I think we probably covered most questions. James, we had a little bit of a lag there from you in Zurich, but I think everything was heard and understood. And it appears, unless I've got a different view here, that Mark might have just had to leave us in the airport. And Mark's on the move. Russ, it's great to see your smiling face. I'm glad you're able to relax. I'm glad you could get to the Order of St. John's annual investiture at Trinity Boston, and glad you're with us here. We pray, as you do, for the people of Texas and Louisiana for the latest storm. And I assured the Dean of Christ Church Cathedral, Houston, your buddy Barclay Thompson, yesterday, that we were praying for folks there with the incoming rain, Louisiana, Houston, Texas, Galveston, and so on. Thanks very much. Russ, any parting blessings from you?
No, I just say go, or better yet, come. Come and go. It's time to do this kind of wonderful travel, and I'm really looking forward to what the future holds. I'd go with, we're planning on going when one of our trips is overseas. We plan on hitting some of the other places on our own. Right. So just travel is a wonderful gift that we have.
Yeah, it is. Sarah and I sometimes will be with a pilgrimage group and then have planned ahead another 4 days thereafter on our own, or go to the adjoining country. And I know a lot of folks do that. It really is, once you're there, take advantage of having some free time and you're comfortable with the locale and with the customs. And so it's a lot of fun. James, I hope your time is in Zurich is fruitful. I don't know where you're headed next.
Well, I'm coming home on Wednesday, so
okay,
that's
good.
a little business to do tomorrow, and we'll be back. So
you do get to
I would say a hearty amen to what Russ said. Just get out there and go.
Great. And thanks again. Joe Swimmer is still with us in the background, and Joe and the SEEP team will be making this available by recording tomorrow, along with some other resources that'll be posted at the SEEP Network website and with emails going to folks. So there'll be an opportunity to check back in with us and to check on some other resources. EO and others will be sponsors and partners at the SEEP Network Conference in Atlanta in February. Mark A. and I will also be at the General Convention of the Episcopal Church, delayed. I'll tell you this, Russ, and you'll understand what I'm saying. Sarah and I will get back to Maine, the coast of Maine, in late June next year. And I will then leave Maine on the 5th of July to go to General Convention in Baltimore. To which Sarah Fishburne says, I hope you enjoy it and have a great time. So there you are.
That trip, that's right.
So thank you, Russ, very much. And thanks, James. Thanks to Joe Swimmer and to Mark A. and to all of our participants. And we'll be seeing you. God bless you.
Thank you. God bless.